The complete trip through the book of Ruth, talking about the way that God blessed her, and this morning we're going to talk about the fact that when she came empty, God filled her. Thinking about what it is to be empty. Obviously, we can use that in a lot of different ways, and a lot of different ways at a lot of different times in our lives. We may feel empty. Think about things that make us feel empty, whether it's loss or sickness or failures of some sort. All of those things can cause that empty feeling, and maybe you're thinking of something that's going on in your life right now. A way that you feel like you've been emptied and you need filling. Well, I urge you to pay attention this morning, because we're going to talk a little bit about that. One of the things that we celebrate here at Westside is the fact that God continues to fill us. I'm thankful for the guys that I work with. I'm thankful that God has given us an opportunity to work together. We sure enjoyed working with Neil when he was here, and thankful that God gave him an opportunity in another place, but sad about his leaving, and yet Jake has filled in admirably, and we're thankful for him and what he does. We're thankful for Josh and the ability that he has to do so many things administratively and in the office, but also reaching out with young people here at the congregation and just standing up here and welcoming us like he did this morning. Although he did have a little faux pas this morning, I don't know if you caught it, but he said that a lot of our normal people were missing this morning. I'm not sure what he's saying about you all, but he does a great job with that. And then Zach in leading worship just couldn't be more of a treasure. We're so thankful for him. And I know you're looking forward this week to welcoming Mark Hickson as he comes and as he leads us as well, our youth. And we'll look forward to that. Maybe some more information about, be watching for some more information about helping him with unpacking, as well as kind of getting started off this week as he gets going with his youth ministry here at Westside. We're looking forward to having him and Sandy and the rest of the family come and join us. And don't want to fail to mention Aris and the work that he does either, because it's tremendous. Nothing like it that I know of anywhere around. And so we're thankful for everyone that God has given us and how he continues to fill us up. When I thought of an example in my life of empty, I kind of thought of a strange example. It was an example of my golf game. There's a lot of emptiness there, I can tell you. It's about as bad as you get. Although I've heard that you don't really want a preacher that's good at golf, right? Because you know where he spends a lot of his time. That's not true of all of them. There are some guys that are just naturally good, but I'm just naturally bad, and that's kind of the way it works. And it reminded me of a time when I was golfing, and forgive me if I've told this story to some of you, but it was a time when I was at a low point in my golf game, and I remember playing through, I don't remember, we were on the back nine somewhere, and there was a fairway that went out and kind of did a dog leg to the right around a lake. And, water, when you don't play well, water's scary. Because you know that it's not just water, it's a golf ball magnet, and it tends to draw things that way. And I hit a ball, and it just went badly. It sliced badly to the right off of the tee, but it didn't go in the water. It landed right beside the lake. And I thought, well, here's my chance. I'm gonna make a shot here. I had in my mind picturing it just sailing up over the lake and landing on the fairway, out of trouble. So I go and I took my golf club and lined up carefully. The ball was sitting in a place where it was accessible, and that was good. And I made my first strike at it, and it went off the top of the club or the bottom of the club, however that works, hit the top of the ball, and it just went straight into the lake. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to give up here. And I took another ball, and I put it down. This one I could place a little better. You know how you kind of set it up on the grass a little bit to make it stand up taller. And that one I hit. And it went a little better, but it went in the lake. So I tried it again. Number 3, put it down there, hit it, it went into the lake. 4, 5, 6, into the lake. 7, went up in the air, sliced, and went into another lake. Number 8, I threw in by myself. I just threw it. 9, 10, 11 went into the lake. Finally, on my 12th ball, put it down, I hit it, and it did just exactly what I imagined it doing. Went up, sailed over the lake, and landed in the fairway. And I remember going around the lake and coming up. I didn't see the guys that I was golfing with, and then when I found them, they were actually laying on the ground laughing. They thought that was so funny. And here's what was interesting. At that point in time, I owned a total of 2 golf balls. I had emptied the bag of everything that I had when it came to golf balls, and I honestly, after that game, I was considering giving the game up. I just completely stopping playing because I knew that just really wasn't likely to get much better. Plus, I was going to have to go out and spend, I don't know, $30 or $40, sometimes $50 on golf balls just to replenish it. And so I was thinking about giving it up. But the next time I had an opportunity to preach, I told that story in front of the church there. And I remember that next week or so, I would find these gifts on my door in my office. These people bought these big bags of golf balls and just left them for me. And I still have, honestly, a large bag that I haven't used yet full of probably 150 golf balls that they just brought and left for me. More than filling the little place I have in my golf bag for golf balls. And it's an interesting illustration of how things can go unexpectedly, very unexpectedly, from empty to full. And that's what happened. I didn't deserve it. In fact, I deserved to be empty in that situation. I had earned that. And yet, because of the grace of a lot of people understanding and laughing at my misery, they were willing to bring those and help me out in that situation. You kind of see a parallel in the story of Ruth, though my story is a little silly. Her story is dead serious. You remember when her and Naomi got together, they got together around a tragic situation from the beginning. Naomi had 2 sons. Her and her husband had moved to Moab. And the husband dies early on, leaving those 2 sons with their mother. And the 2 sons marry Moabite women because they were in the land of Moab. And through the course of life, we get the sense that because of their names, we get the sense that they were sickly or they had some kind of health issues. Both of the sons passed away as well, leaving Naomi with her 2 daughters-in-law and no hope for income, for someone to take care of them. And so Naomi made the choice to come back to Bethlehem, to Judah, to Israel, where she was from. She told her daughters-in-law to stay, and one of them decided to go ahead and stay. But Ruth, her daughter-in-law, the Moabite, said, no, where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your God will be my God. Your people, my people. Where you die, I will die, and I'll be buried there. That was her commitment to Ruth, to stay with her, to stay faithful, to take care of her, to help her, because she saw her situation. We talked about the fact that Ruth threw a lot of caution to the wind with that. There was a real possibility, a very real possibility, that she was looking at abject poverty, that she was looking at a life of misery and difficulty and humiliation in a strange land, not knowing anyone. There was a tremendous risk that she was taking going in the first place. Last week we talked about the fact that she had met Boaz, this Israelite who was of good standing in the area, and he was also a relative. And her mother-in-law, Naomi, had noticed that Boaz had taken notice of Ruth and said, hey, this is interesting. This may be the way we can be, and the word they use is redeemed. Last week, in the text that we read in chapter 3, Naomi devises a plan for Ruth to approach Boaz. Remember, she did it at night after he had been worked all day in the fields and he was sleeping in the threshing floor, which is where he was doing some of his farm work. She says, go to him and uncover his feet and then lay down there by his feet. And she did that while Boaz was sleeping. He wakes up with cold feet and realizes that he's got this woman there by him. And what are you doing? And she says, I'm Ruth, and I want you to cover me with the corner of your garment because you're a redeemer, a kinsman redeemer, or a guardian redeemer, whatever your language, whatever your translation says. And he said, bless you. That was the first words out of his mouth. God bless you. And he told her, he promised her at that point in time, I'll see that it gets done. There's one person that's closer relative than me, and so I'm going to give him the opportunity first. And if he doesn't do it, though, I guarantee you I'll do it. You will not go through this day without knowing that you're going to be taken care of. And that was Boaz's promise to her. As we move into chapter 4, we see him making good on his promise. And we get an interesting look into remember this is in the time of the judges, before the kings of Israel, when there was probably more of a developed system of authority in each town, more of a developed system of the elders of each town and how they would handle things. But in the time of the judges, we see Boaz making his way to the town gate. And the town gate, as I understand it, was a place that was kind of the gathering place for men. Not only it was an opportunity for them to keep the town secure by kind of monitoring who goes in and out of town, but it was a time for them to get together and talk. And the important and influential men of town would get together at the town gate. They would talk about things that are going on in town. They'd make plans for how they were going to deal with issues that were taking place. They would make plans for how they were going to deal with the troublemakers, how they were going to deal with things that were good, how they were going to invest funds, and so forth. And so there are a lot of things that happened at the town gate. And that's where Boaz made his way, knowing that this nearer relative, this nearer redeemer, kinsman redeemer, whatever your translation says, was going to be there. And so he approaches the gate you can see in chapter 4, he approaches that gate. He calls on this man, we never get his name, tells him, collects 10 of the elders of the town, which constituted a quorum in their society, and said, I want you guys to sit down, I got something I got to tell you. So they sit, and he says, listen, Naomi's come back to Bethlehem, and she needs some land redeemed. The language there is unclear. Either Elimelech had sold his land, and she needed someone to buy it back for her because she couldn't afford it, and that was allowable by Hebrew law. Or she was too poor to take care of the land and needed to sell it in order to get money to live on. Not sure which direction what we're hearing there, but she needed someone to pay for that land, and that would help her in some way, shape, or form. And it was also required by the law that someone in the family be willing to take care of her. We talked last week about this law that governs the guardian or kinsman redeemer in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And we see how that kind of things work. Leviticus chapter 5 also has a statement about how the poor are to be helped by those who are family members who will be their redeemers. We talked about the definition of the word redeem, meaning to buy back. And that's exactly what was going on here, that they were preparing to redeem that property back for her. And that's what was taking place. It says that when they get together, they're seated. Boaz calls this other man in, this other relative in, and says, listen, I've got a proposal. Naomi's got this property. She needs it redeemed. If you want to do it, you're the nearest relative. I'll let you do it. If you don't, that's fine. I'll take care of it because I'm next in line. And the man immediately says, I'll redeem it. I'll take care of it. Meaning that he was going to be able to buy more land. This is land that would technically belong to Naomi's family and allow her to use. But he would also have a relationship with her too that would allow him to get some use out of it as well. They could share some of the use of the land. It was a win-win situation for both of them. And then Boaz says, well, great. By the way, when you buy this land, you also are going to acquire Ruth's daughter-in-law, or Naomi's daughter-in-law Ruth, as a part of this property because her husband Mahlon died. They didn't have a son. They don't have an heir to take care of the land. At that, the man says, well, in that case, I'm out. I can't do that. Taking on another wife was complicated enough back in those days. He was expected, obviously, to care for her and whatever offspring she would have. But it also meant that it put his inheritance at risk in some ways. If by some chance his heirs or the heirs to his property would pass away, and this young man, when he died, would be the only surviving heir, then all of his property would go to the household of Elimelech. And that was putting his family at risk. And he wasn't wanting to do that. It also could mean that the children that were born in his home would also have a right to some of his inheritance, having to divide that pie slice, the slices of pie for his his property even smaller. And so again, it affects his heirs. And he said, because of that, I'm out. I'm not going to do it. So Boaz says, all right, I'll take care of it. I will redeem the land. And they did a strange thing with sandals, and it was really an unusual, must have been an unusual thing to see, at least it would be for us, that they take off sandals and they exchange them. I give him my sandal, he gives me his, and we keep that as a sign that we've made this deal. I guess if there's some question in the future, you go back, you get the sandal and say, nope, here's his sandal, this is it. And I don't know how you know that it's his sandal, if it has some unique feature, but it's that's how they did the deal back then. It's interesting because a brother, that in Deuteronomy 25, it says that a brother has a right to refuse to be the guardian redeemer. He could refuse it. And I'm sure back in those days, for some of the reasons we've listed and others, there were a lot of people that did that. They refused to take on that responsibility of being the guardian redeemer. In fact, it's interesting. It says that the law prescribes how the widow, the one who is asking to be redeemed, can handle that situation. It's called the unsandaled law, and she could call him before the elders of the city if he refused to marry her. Her husband's brother refuses to marry her. She calls him before the elders of the city. The Bible says she's to take one of his sandals. She's to spit in his face. And she's to tell him this is what happens in Israel to someone who refuses to take their responsibilities. And then his family would be known then as the family of the unsandaled. It was a walk of shame because you hadn't borne your responsibility. And it was something that was discouraged. Not impossible. I'm guessing a lot of people did it, but it was certainly discouraged. Boaz in this situation wasn't about to be that guy. He wanted to help Naomi. He wanted to help Ruth. He wanted to bring them into his family. I think it's interesting as he responds to her, and he says, God bless you, for you didn't run after the younger men. You decided to do things the right way, the legal way. We get the sense that there was may have mentioned last week, you may remember, there's a pretty good difference in the age between Boaz and Ruth. Ruth was likely to be in her 20s somewhere. Boaz was likely to be in his 50s or 60s. So we're talking about a pretty good gap. She could have run after some of the younger men. She could have enticed one of them to marry her and join their family. But again, the law stated that she was to marry in the family. She was a Moabite, so she didn't have to live by the law necessarily, but she decided to do the right thing by God. And because of that, because she did what was right, her family line was blessed. And the blessings for her continue as we see that story, as we see the situation move on. It's interesting to see the response of the council as Boaz mentions that he's going to take Ruth to be his wife. In chapter 4, verses 11 and 12, it says, Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who built up together the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. For more on the Perez and Tamar story, read your bulletin article. I've written a little bit about that. It's another case of how levirate marriage affected a family and made it flourish and grow as well. So Boaz and Ruth are married. They come together, and their marriage produces a son. And his name is Obed, which means servant. It's probably short for a name that means servant of the Lord. And Obed, again, we don't know much about him moving on. We know that he's got these parents who were people of standing in Israel, and we know that he's got some offspring that are pretty impressive. He's the father of Jesse, who's the father of David, King David of Israelite fame, the David who's still celebrated in ethnic Hebrew and ethnic Jewish people culture. He's still a big deal in that culture. And then obviously on down that line we have Joseph and Mary, who gave birth, and Mary, through the Holy Spirit, gave birth to Jesus. And in that line, that family line, Jesus Christ is born. What a tremendous honor that's placed upon someone who's a foreigner, that's placed upon someone who, through no real right of her own, no real obligation, was given this honor to become a part of that ancestry, to become a part of that family line that later on produces the Son of God. She could have certainly been destitute. She could have certainly remained empty. But yet she, through faith in God and through a desire to want to help Naomi, decided to take empty, decided to be empty, and if that was it, so be it, but trusted that God at some point would fill her. And that's exactly what happened. God reached down into her life, seeing her humility, seeing her kindness and her patience, and he blessed her. It's interesting to see the response of the women of the town. When she had this baby, says Naomi, in the passage that Robin read, Naomi took this baby into her arms, and the women of the town gather around her. It's clear that they're championing her. They see her as someone who's lost so much, and they gather around her, and they're celebrating the fact now Naomi has a son. He can care for her in her old age, and they were absolutely thrilled for her. And you get that sense, that heartwarming sense at the end of the story, as they're talking about the fact that Naomi came to Bethlehem empty, but God would not allow that to remain. God filled her up. From empty to full. It's the story of Ruth and Naomi. I told you before, it's maybe one of the most heartwarming stories it's the Hallmark Channel of the Bible books, right? It's the heartwarming story in the Bible. And it shows us how God cares, how much he cares for those who are humble, for those of humble means who are willing to wait, and in his time, he lifts them up. We talked about how important it is in our lives to think in terms of being humble. We looked at the concept of humility early on as we see Ruth being willing to submit herself in humility before Naomi, her mother-in-law, and just go with her to take care of her. Throwing caution to the wind, throwing self-interest to the wind, she went with her mother-in-law and was vowing to take care of her. And we see how important that is to the theme of the story. In doing so, she submitted to God. Your God will be my God. She submitted to his law, taking Boaz instead of going outside the family and looking for a younger man. She was doing things, she tried to do things the right way and humbly waited for God to fill her. We've talked about humility. We've talked about humble kindness, a kind of humility that also affects how we treat other people. We're not going to be grumpy in being humble. We're not going to be haughty in being kind. We're going to be both, humble and kind. It's what God validates. It's what he admonishes, and it's what he blesses in this story. But add to that humble kindness, also patience. Being willing to wait on God to do things in his time. You know, if any of us were in Ruth's situation, it wouldn't be unusual for us to want to be filled right now. I'm feeling empty and I need to be filled now. I've got to take on this problem or these problems that are confronting me, and I've got to solve them. I've got to do them my way and take advantage of whoever I need to take advantage of to make sure that my situation is resolved. We want results, and we want them now. In the book of Ruth, God shows us someone who just waited, who was willing to do the hard things, to live life the hard way, who was willing to look in the future and see nothing but loose ends. That's what Ruth did. She had no guarantee that anything good was going to happen moving forward. Could be that her lot would have been poverty. It would have been difficulty and struggle and humiliation and shame. She had those possibilities out there, but she decided just to wait and to trust that if she did the right thing, God would fill her one day. Talked to you at the beginning of the sermon when I asked you, are you feeling empty or full today? And if you're on the empty side, what is it that makes you feel empty? What is it that causes you to have that empty feeling? Again, I mentioned a number of things that it could be. But in our lesson this morning, and as we look at the life of Ruth and we see how she went from empty to full, we realize that God was not responsible for the empty. God doesn't make that happen, but he did allow it to happen, for her to be empty. And he allowed that to happen for a time, and we see how during that time he tested her. Would she be patient? Would she stay with her mother-in-law? Would she continue to glean and to work in the field of Boaz with very little reward other than just being able to take home some food for her family? Would she be willing to settle for an older man, even though there might have been more attractive men around her, because it was the right thing to do? And would she continue to submit to that family? And as she did all of those things, as she passed all of those tests that God put before her, he lifted her in his time. So whatever you're feeling empty about today, whatever may have in your life made you feel empty, be sure of this. God didn't cause you to become empty. A lot of reasons why that kind of thing can happen. Sometimes it's just the randomness of our fallen world, the fact that evil exists and it's here. Those things cause all kinds of difficulty. And they're not your fault, they're not my fault, but they happen to good people with the same frequency that they happen to bad people. They happen to Christians with the same frequency that they happen to others because of the fallen world that we live in. And yet when we become empty because of those events, because of personal choices, because of the choices of others and things that have happened to us, when we become empty, it's important that we realize that what lies ahead might be a series of tests designed to help us to know whether we're going to stay faithful as Ruth did. Whether we're going, as we make those same commitments that she made to Naomi and to God, as saying, I will stay, I will be true, I'll stay with you. Are we going to stay with him? Or do we take other avenues? Do we kind of take things into our own hands? Try to control it by ourselves, like Saul did. You remember when he was going into battle and he's facing the Philistines and his men were starting to scatter because they were waiting for the prophet Samuel to come and offer a sacrifice. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to get things going, so he did it himself instead of waiting for Samuel to come and do it with him. And when Samuel finally arrives, the sacrifice is already going on, and he says, hey, what's going on? And Saul says, hey, you were late. I needed to do it, so I went ahead and took care of it. Samuel said, you really should have waited. Had you waited, things would have gone well. But because you didn't, it's not going to go well. And that's the life of Saul, right? Saul acted impetuously a number of times, made decisions that were self-centered, that were self-focused many times. And because of that, God rejected him. But had he waited, as did Ruth, as does David later on, and a number of other Bible characters that we can talk about, waiting for God to fill them, even when they feel empty, God fills them and lifts them beyond what they could have possibly imagined. If you're empty this morning, that's kind of where you're feeling. If you're wondering, when is God going to fill me? When does that happen? I ask you to take the story of Ruth to heart and know that you need only stay humble. You need to be kind to the people who are around you. You need to be patient even though it's so hard and your struggle is so real. And wait for that time that God reaches down to lift you as well. And just as he lifted Ruth to a place that she could not have possibly imagined herself being, a place that was more impossibly good than she could have imagined, he's going to do the same thing for us too. He's going to lift us. If we have that patience and kindness and humility, he's going to lift us to a place that we couldn't have imagined. It doesn't mean riches and fame like it meant for some. Doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to work out the way that we thought it would. But it does mean that as we look back, we'll be able to see his hand at work in our lives as we've put ourselves in his hands. And we'll see the good things that he's brought us. And we'll know that there are good things that lie ahead. If you're empty this morning, know that he will fill you. Know that he will fill you to the fullness of the measure of God. In Ephesians chapter 3, the prayer that Paul prays for the Ephesians, being concerned for their unity and being concerned that they do the right things and make the right choices as well, knowing that in terms of their relationships, they were empty, but that he was going to fill them. Look at what he fills them with. He says in verse 14 of chapter 3, "So I bow before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth gets its true name. I ask the Father in his great glory to give you power and be strong inwardly through his Spirit. I pray that Christ will live in your hearts by faith and that your life will be strong in love and built on love. And I pray that you and all God's holy people will have the power together to understand the greatness of Christ's love, how wide and how long and how high and how deep that love is. Christ's love is greater than anyone can ever know, but I pray that you will be able to know that love." And listen to the last line, "Then you can be filled with all the fullness of God." You can be filled. And again, when we look at we ask the question of that passage, well, what are we filled with? We're filled with Christ's love. And when Christ's love fills us, Christ's love is all we need. Are you filled with that love this morning? Even in some of your emptiness, empty parts of your lives, things that you had hoped for that didn't come to fruition, things that you'd expected that just didn't materialize, setbacks that you've had along the way that have made you feel, well, empty at times. I invite you to remain humble, to treat people with kindness and compassion, to know the love of Christ that hovers over you, to be patient and wait for that time when he fills you, when he lifts you, when he shows you his plan for you, and when you see his hand at work in your lives. Listen, if you have emptiness this morning, we want to be there with you in that. There'll be people around the room as we sing this next song to pray with you, and some in the back, who would love to pray with you through your emptiness, whatever that might be. If you know someone who's going through a season of emptiness, let's pray for them as well. Let's take the time to put some prayer into their lives and in what they're feeling. And trust that God will fill them, will fill their emptiness. And I trust that he'll do that. Start doing that this morning as we enter a time of prayer together. If you haven't taken Jesus to be your Lord and Savior yet, this morning is your morning of filling. That in your emptiness that you may not even realize you have, God's waiting for you to come that he might fill you, that he might bless you and begin to show you his idea, his plan, and his purpose for your life, whatever that might be. If you haven't done that yet, we invite you to come. The baptism is an easy thing to do. It's one dip under the water, but as you rise to walk in a new life. Your sins being washed away and having the hope and the knowledge that heaven is your home in the future. If you haven't done that yet, please don't neglect that. Know that God wants you there. He wants to fill you. He wants to show you his love. We've got to be patient. We've got to be humble. We've got to be kind, but an expectation of knowing that his filling is coming. We invite you to come and accept that filling, to know that it's there for you, and we invite you to do so as we sing this song to him.